Good morning, everybody. It's Thursday morning, and welcome to the Vicarage here in Penn. Thank you, as always, for joining us for our Bible reading today. And I hope you're enjoying the book of Psalms as much as I am. I'm finding it really inspiring, and I'm really glad we're doing it. But today we're in Psalm 60. So, without further ado, Psalm 60 it will be. O God, you have rejected us, broken our defences. You've been angry, now restore us. You've caused the land to quake, you've torn it open. Repair the cracks in it, for it's tottering. You've made your people suffer hard things. You've given us wild wine to drink that made us reel. You've set up a banner for those who fear you, to rally to it out of bowshot. Give victory with your right hand and answer us, so those whom you love may be rescued. God has promised in his sanctuary, with exultation I will divide up Shechem, and portion out the vale of Succoth. Gilead is mine, Manasseh is mine, Ephraim is my helmet, Judah is my scepter. Moab is my wash basin. On Edom I hurl my shoe. Over Philistia I shout in triumph. Who will bring me to the fortified city? Who will lead me to Edom? Have you not rejected us, O God? You do not go out, O God, with our armies. O grant us help against the foe, for human help is worthless. With God we shall do valiantly. It's he who will tread down our enemies. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Okay, if you've been listening to the Psalms last few days, I hope you have. This will sound like another one where the record's got stuck because David's got enemies. Having said that, though, this time it's a bit different. The last few Psalms have been where David is before David became king, usually when he was fleeing for his life from King Saul, who was out to kill him. And so quite a few times where David gets betrayed or David gets given away or Saul's pursuing his life or is hiding in a cave or whatever it may be, you've had David's enemies, which are basically being the king who's trying to pursue him for his life. Psalm 60 is a bit different. Now we go on into the time when David is king. Basically, 1 Samuel has David, it's before he becomes king, and 2 Samuel is when you have David being king and beyond. So, we're now in 2 Samuel. You hear about what happens to David after Saul's died and David becomes king. And what's going on in this psalm is very much, we have King David now, as opposed to David before, if that makes sense. So we now have King David. And when David comes to power, things basically go very, very well for him. His unique achievement was that he united the whole kingdom under one. But his armies also did very, very well as well. And what's quite strange is the context of Psalm 60 is that David's armies are actually doing pretty well. You wouldn't believe it reading the psalm in the first place, but David's armies are actually doing very well. So he's actually winning battles around the Euphrates, which are towards Iran, Iraq, that kind of area down there. But because David is doing well, other shall we say areas around, they get quite jealous, and other countries around form alliances against David. And what's going on in Psalm 60 is that David's armies are away from home, and they're doing very, very well. I mean, it talks about when Joab, the italics bit, because when Joab on his return killed 12,000 Edomites in the Valley of Salt. I mean, things were going very, very well. But while David and his armies were away, the Edomites, that's the people in the south, take the opportunity to attack at home. So, in a sense, while the armies are away winning battles and conquering lands or whatever elsewhere, or winning battles over there, the Edomites from the south take the opportunity to attack them back home. And that's the context we have here. So this time we have David with enemies, but this time we have King David as opposed to David running away from the king, if that makes sense. So that's the context of what's going on in this morning's psalm. And essentially the psalm, the structure of the psalm is essentially in three parts. In the first part, we have David praying to God. In the second, that's verses 1 to 5. Then in 6 to 8, we have God replying. And then in verses 9 to the end, we have David praying again. So we have a prayer of David in verses 1 to 5. We have God's response in 5 to 8. And we have David's prayer in response to God's response, if you know what I mean, verses 9 to the end as well. So that's the kind of what's really going on. That's the structure of the psalm. And I think really there are just a couple of things I want to say from this morning's psalm today, really. Firstly, this. David clearly, through this psalm, sees his success on the battlefield, his success as a king, entirely on the presence of God. It's absolutely clear. He sees it very, very clear. Yeah, and you know, but at the end, you know, it's quite clear. Oh, grant us help against the foe, for human help is worthless. So David sees his success, his how he gets on the battlefield, as I say, how he gets on as a king, entirely due to the presence of God, or not the presence of God, if you see what I mean. That he sees in everything entirely on God with him. He doesn't see it on his own skill. He doesn't see it as being the skill of his commanders. It's not some great leadership thing he's got. It's not some new political stance. It's not the latest Leopard 2 tanks or whatever it may be. He doesn't see it in those kind of terms at all. David clearly sees whether he succeeds or whether he fails entirely down to the presence of God. And in verses 1 to 5, he pleads to God. He says, because you have crushed us, because you're not going out with our armies, because you've left us, you've given us bad wine to drink, and you've made things difficult for us. So he clearly sees that the reason they've had troubles at home is because God hasn't been supporting them for whatever reason it may be. And so he pleads to God that God will help him. And he uses quite kind of emotionally charged languages as well. He says, for those that you have loved, give victory with your right hand and answer us, so those whom you love may be rescued. It's almost like, if you really love us, come and rescue us. It reminds me of in John chapter 11, where Lazarus has died. And I think it's Martha says to Jesus, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. He whom you love. It's kind of, it's kind of quite strong emotional stuff here going on. If you really loved us, you kind of come and help us. So David clearly sees his success or failure as entirely due to God's presence or not, if God's helping him or not. And it kind of reminds me really of when I first started following my pursuit, my ordination, and I got through the selection, and I started working full time for the church. And it dawned on me for the first time that my success or failure, whether I did well or not, was entirely, I was now completely dependent on God. And whether anything happened or not, whether people became Christians or not, or whatever, was down to the presence of God. And it kind of reminds us really that we need to, that actually the main work we do, if you like, is in prayer. That it's not down to sort of clever leadership or whatever. It's actually down to God's presence with us. So if we want to see our church flourishing, actually we need to spend more time in prayer. We need to ask God to help us, and so on. So David clearly sees how he gets on, as I say, not in terms of human support or clever leadership or alliances or clever military tactics or the latest bit of equipment or whatever it may be. He clearly sees his successful failure as entirely due to the presence of God. And then God responds in verses 6 to 8. And I think the language here is quite fun, because if you're going to have someone helping you, you need to know that God is either strong enough to help you, and you need to know also that God is on your side as well. And the language here is quite interesting, really, because he talks about first about having power, and he talks about them being his people as well. But in terms of are they his people or not? Well, it's quite interesting here, because Gilead, which is inside God's people, is mine. Manasseh, one of Israel's tribes, is mine. Ephraim is my helmet. Judah is my scepter. They're David's people. But then the enemies, Moab, my wash basin. I want to wash my wash bowl, if you like. Edom is the place where I throw my shoe. You walk in the house, you chuck your shoe, and it's like that's the place I'll throw my shoe. And over Philistia, I shout in triumph. So he clearly is, as you can see here, that David knows. God reminds him God reminds David that he's on their side. And we need to hear, my friends, that God is for us. God is with us. And please hear in your heart today that God is with you. And secondly, the language here is very strong. Over Philistia, I shout in triumph. That God has the strength to help as well. And so with that in mind, David says, who will bring me to the fortified city? You've rejected us, O God, but grant us help against the foe, for human help is worthless. And with God we shall do valiantly, and it's he who will tread down our enemies as well. So David can see that his entire success or failure in everything he does is not down to clever tactics, clever equipment, whatever it may be. It's entirely down to the presence of God. We need to pray that God will give us his presence today. But when God responds, God is showing them that he's on their side, that God is with David. And however it may seem at the time, God is with them, and he will do valiantly with them. They will do valiantly with him. But also, he has the power, he has the strength too, that he will win victories. And with God, we shall do valiantly, and it's he who will tread down our foes. So my friends, know today, let's recognise the fact that, however we succeed as church actually is down to God with us. It's God who does the work. Secondly, to know that God is with us. God's on our side. And third, to know that God is powerful enough, strong enough to do what needs to be done. So let's remember that it's God, and through him we all do great things. Through him our church will flourish and grow. Hope that makes sense. God bless you. May you know that God. May you know God with you, helping you, guiding you, loving you. And may you know that you are his and that he loves you very much.